Thank you very much indeed, Randy. And it is a delight to be here this afternoon with Joanna. As you can probably hear, I've got a bit of a loud voice and I'm very happy to use it. Joanna, you have a much quieter voice than me, and so Joanna is going to have the microphone handy, so hopefully we can get a little bit of a comfortable balance between us as we have a little bit of a chat this afternoon. But it's lovely to be here with you, Joanna.
Oh, ditto, ditto.
We are surrounded, immersed here in the gallery by this glorious body of work that you have produced. While we start to get a little bit of a sense of perhaps how the microphone is going to work for you and your voice level, let's just hear a little bit about where we are. Yes, we're here in the King Street Gallery, but surrounded by these landscapes that are close to your home. Tell us about the area that they are in.
Thank you, Richard. So these paintings were made near my studio on Mount Desert Island. And Mount Desert Island houses Arcadia National Park, which was built in the 1916s by Woodrow Wilson, the president at the time. And then in 1926, David Rockefeller gifted a lot of his land that he owned on the island to the park, and he brought Italian stonemasons to the island to build beautiful bridges and carriageways, and so that makes it particularly special. And so basically, I live at the foothills of that park, and I hike in it every day. And in the winter, I ski and I skate on the pond and sled on the pond. So you can imagine going there, having been brought up in Australia, not having any winter sports skills. I learnt that, and it's been really special because I've been able to experience the landscape in all seasons and respond to it. And so these paintings are essentially made about the fall, which we call autumn. I'm learning all these American terminologies, and the colour is absolutely exquisite. And when I first went to Maine, I thought, how am I going to unpack this? Like, how am I going to use these vibrant colours without the painting seeming too pretty or decorative, which is my biggest fear. And also, I didn't have enough skill around colour theory. Like, I didn't learn that at art school, unfortunately. I learned other good things at art school, which I won't go into.
Life skills.
Mainly about drinking rum and coke and playing snooker. But I taught myself how to work across the palette with these vibrant, sometimes fluorescent colours, and incorporate complex greys into the work, which settles the colour in and builds a harmonious feel to the work, I believe.
You talk about these beautiful colours that you have, that do surround you in the autumn, but this place, the Mount Desert Island and the Arcadia National Park, this is a wild part of the world, even though it has some beautifully crafted stone bridges, as you've explained to us. But this is right up in Maine, in the far north of the United States. And I mean, how many months of snow a year do you get, for example?
We get 5 months of snow, and which is exciting for me, but the people in Maine hate it because it slows everything down. I mean, I have to have a man come and plow our driveway just so we can get out, and I shovel a path to my studio, and it can be this tall, like a corridor, which I love because I'm building environmental sculptures inadvertently. And also I can't leave the house without many layers and mittens because people get frostbite. But also I have to put a cleat on my boot so that I don't slip. 2 months ago we had 6 inches of ice and then it snowed overnight and it's just very precarious. And the amount of people that fall and break their wrists, and the last thing I need to do is to be breaking a wrist while I'm painting a show. So there's those logistical issues that come up due to the environment, but it is very beautiful and the snow opens up this quietness and introspection that is really conducive to making work. Because there's a lot of painters here today and what we need essentially is solitude to think through our ideas and make a body of work without interruptions. And the good thing is that in the winter, a lot of the people leave the island. They only summer on the island. So summer is a verb in Maine, and so they leave. They all go to Puerto Rico or Florida. My worst nightmare. And we stay, and it's a totally different demographic. In the winter, it's people that what they call all year rounders, and I'm an all year rounder, even though people find that hard to believe. They say, oh, where do you go for the winter? And I'm like, here, it's my favorite season.
But even though, as you were saying, it can be quite dangerous sometimes physically to be out and about,
yes.
Nevertheless, you still are. And whether it's winter or spring that's going to be coming up when you return home this time,
yes.
You're out in those wild places, quite
yes.
close to where you live.
Yes.
What's it like to be able to get into those places? Can you walk around yourself, hiking around, yes. making some
yes.
plein air sketches
yes.
and so on?
And that's what I do. I go out. I rarely see anybody because there's miles and miles of carriage roads and then trails. And there's a guidebook, and I'll go in the morning and decide where I'm going to go and the level of difficulty. So there's, as Randy would know, there's a hike called the Beehive, which most people have to get, it's brutal, and most people have to get airlifted out of there, right? So I haven't done that hike, but I've done every other peak on the island. So I go out on my own, I take my camera, I take a little kit of generally a monoprinting kit, which I find is really easy to get ideas down fast. And I do some printing out there and make some drawings, and then I come home and each painting has a manila folder with the information about this painting that I'm going to build that I can refer to. And it might even have some poetry that was made about that place. And I'd like to read some poetry to you today if we have some time, because it very much informs my work and inspires me forward when I get stuck. But basically, these paintings are constructions that happen in the studio with my memory, with my emotional feeling about the place I'm painting, but also formal considerations that or the notations that I've gathered out at that place.
So we may talk in more detail about your present process, but as you're explaining those step-by-step approaches, it does sound as though you have a very well considered process as you approach the environment.
Yes, so I was thinking about this yesterday as I gave my talk to the Women's Club, that the work is my emotional response to the landscape, but when I'm out there, I see the whole landscape as a painting. So in a very formal way, I see the shapes, the tone, the texture, and I think, oh, that would make a great painting. And so I make some notations and do a little painting, little sketch, and take some photos. But when I come home, I use my emotional response to it and build the painting in the studio, where I'm opening myself up to abstraction and arbitrary things that might happen along the way, almost like it's like an out-of-body experience. So when I came to see my paintings after they'd been shipped over here and I hadn't seen them for 2 months, and I walked in and Randy and Robert had hung the show, and I was really taken aback. It was like I had no memory of making these paintings. Because it is such a metaphysical experience, once I work out intellectually and cerebrally how I'm going to approach the work, then it's very much a body, spiritual approach where I'm guided by the painting, and it's this toing and froing, this sort of tension between what's happening in the canvas and then me trying to make sense of the mess that I've made.
So with the glorious colours that we see around us, you talk about your emotion really informing the work when you're in your studio. How much would you say of the colours that we see in these works are reflections of the actuality of the landscape, and how much are they the colours of your emotions as you try to recapture that landscape?
The colours are exactly as they are in the landscape. I know it's hard to believe, but it's absolutely gobsmackingly spectacular and almost overwhelmingly so. And so that's why I had to introduce those complex greys to sit against them. I really had a struggle with that, Richard. Yeah.
So these places presumably are ones, as you've been explaining, that you go out and you find, but presumably some of them have become quite familiar over a period of time. Maybe I'm making that assumption.
Places, yeah.
The places themselves. Maybe can you take us to one or two of them, and let's have a look at some of the particular works that we can all see. So please, obviously, feel free to turn around and look at works. But starting perhaps with this spectacularly bright and joyful picture behind you. Where is that, and how did you find this place?
Well, it's just literally 5 minutes from my house, and I've called it Under the Peach Light, because when I went out there in the morning, everything was just shimmering, and this kinetic energy on this pond was just throwing up so much beautiful, warm light. And the idea of capturing that is just so difficult. Like, how am I going to explain this landscape? So I have to do it in an emotional way. I set my palette out and I start. But then you've got formal problems that are set up for you. I hope they're not coming in here.
That's the sound of people seeing your work for the first time and being really excited.
I have to then actually quieten the work down. And how I do that is with this sort of scaffold of a structure over the top. So it's like harmony within diversity. You know, I'm always thinking about that tension between the diversity of all the marks, which is actually how the landscape is. It's like a tapestry, it's like a web of tangled shapes and lines, and you can see it's very unrelated to the landscape that I am familiar with from home, the Oberon landscape that I responded to for 20 years, where you've got beautiful rolling hills and it's very atmospheric and soft, and maybe you'll have some conifers on the fence line, but it's very open. Whereas these paintings are very complicated, complex, and kind of closed. They have like this intimacy. So that's a battle and it's a tension, and I grapple with it in the studio.
Let's go to another particular place and looking over here to this work, which certainly seems to have, I presume, has lots of water reflecting the blue sky. Where is that? And again, how do you respond to those watery elements?
So the island has lots of water, which always astounds me because we're always conscious that we don't have a lot of water where I come from, in the bush, and we're always sort of wanting to do the rain dance. But it's on this island. There's these beautiful pools everywhere. There's glacial pools. There's marshes. There's ponds. And then, of course, we're surrounded by ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. And so what I've enjoyed whilst making these paintings is reflective surfaces. I've never had to deal with reflective surfaces, and you get a lovely dappled light reflecting from the colour above. This is a painting I've called Blue Heron Feather Pond. I make my own titles up because they're poetic feelings about how I feel about the place, and also they relate very strongly to poetry that I'm reading. So every now and again, if I come across a line in a Mary Oliver poem that is pertinent to the work I'm making, I write that down and think about her poem while I'm making the work, and then often incorporate it into the title.
And oh, I'm sorry, and I was about to say, moving to a very different sort of landscape. On the far wall, we seem now to be in the depths of the woods or the forest.
Yes.
Is that again close to where you are?
That's very close. That's just behind my studio, and it is in the winter, and it's very mossy with lots of birches and pathways through, and it's mysterious, and I wanted to evoke that mystery. And then suddenly a bird will swoop through, and I take that into my psyche and my memory, and then somehow it works its way into the painting in a very abstract form. So that's what that painting is about.
We talked, or you started to talk a little while ago about some of the process that now is very much a part of creating these beautifully structured works. I remember having a conversation with you quite a few years ago now, and you had then relatively recently been to the New York Drawing School lengthy 6-day workshop, I think.
Marathon.
Marathon, absolute marathon of drawing.
Some people would know what that is. It's...
But it seemed, and I think you commented at the time, that it was an enabler which suddenly gave you the freedom and the confidence to make the kind of marks that you are making today, but maybe had never made quite before that.
That's right. So it was just after lockdown, and we were all feeling very nervous and worried for ourselves and the world. And I know a lot of people sort of stepped outside or gave themselves permission to step outside their comfort zone. And that's what I did. I'd always wanted to do the New York Studio School drawing marathon, but I had trepidation because I'm not a strong drawer. I haven't ever really focused on drawing because I've been so hungry for the seduction of the paint. And so I decided in this time of quietness, I was going to challenge myself to something. And so I did the New York Studio School Marathon, and it changed my whole practice and my whole way of thinking about approaching the work. It was seminal for me, and I still use those tools today that I learned over that 6-day intensive period. And my work has made an incredible shift since then.
Because before then, in many ways, often, and perhaps you were dealing, as you said, with the Australian landscape and often around Oberon, but there often seemed a lot of veiling, almost memories of places fleeting past, almost with movement in the painting. Then the drawing happened. So how would you describe what you're capturing with the marks now? Is it more concrete, more immediate?
Well, two things happened. The drawing became more confident, and also the Maine landscape requires a lot of drawing to describe it. The thing about the veiling of the landscape where I was for 20 years in Oberon, the landscape lent itself to that because it was so soft, but also my drawing wasn't strong. And you know, there's a lot of people making these blurry, fuzzy paintings, and it's a sort of a veiling of bad drawing, if I can say. And
Never confess.
No, I'm confessing. So I'm now, because I've really got my eye in, I did a lot of drawing when I went to the island to understand the landscape. And now I have the confidence to actually reveal the mark. And the second thing that happened was I changed my medium. I changed from oil to acrylic, and the oil paint, as you guys know, is very soft and you can move it and shift it and create atmosphere in that. Whereas moving to the acrylic, I found I could harness a more emphatic mark, and that helped me in the drawing. And exposed me in many ways. I mean, it was scary, but I felt liberated on many levels.
Because there does feel a sense both of liberation and yet also, as you say, of emphasis, of confidence, of, no, these marks are firm, they're decisive, they're exactly what you've seen.
I think what happened too when I went to Maine, you know, I didn't have my distractions of my buddies who were absolute party animals, and, you know, my buddies and my community, and it was a very lonely time for a while. I did build quite a beautiful community, but there's no artists within that community, and I think I just, and also with the lockdown happening soon after we moved there, a lot of things shifted in my psyche and in my emotional self, and I had some death of dear friends passed, and I couldn't get back to Australia, and so paradoxically the work became more about colour and light and the celebration of life and life affirming, and I think the acrylic and the colour and moving through that full landscape really helped me understand that you've just got to, you know, celebrate life. And I think these paintings are very much a reflection of that.
They certainly feel celebratory. We feel as though we're sitting in the middle of and immersed in a celebration of place, of colour, of light. Yeah. It's interesting, there's a wonderful catalogue that the gallery has produced to accompany this exhibition, which if people haven't seen or haven't got, I think there are probably some on the table over there. It's a beautiful record, but there's also a wonderful essay by Suzette McAvoy in the beginning of that, where, amongst other things, she suggests that some of Bonnard's way of seeing is very much connected to how you see. Can you explain what that connection might be?
So when I went to Maine, the landscape was so different and ever-shifting, changing, ephemeral. And for some reason, I just felt compelled to look to the French Impressionists. And I went to Bonnard and the paintings that he made, looking over the garden. And I just became obsessed by him. And I learned about Bonnard in school, but I brushed him aside. I dismissed him. It was sort of old hat or whatever. So it's funny how a place can make you identify with a painter that once upon a time you wouldn't have given too much emphasis to. You know, I had been looking at really contemporary painters when I went there, like the London School of Painters, Frank Auerbach, Leon Kossoff, the Danish painter Pierre Kirkeby. But for some reason I went back to the Impressionists, and Bonnard has really guided me in my vision to how to make these paintings.
We heard, in fact, Randy made mention of this in her introduction, that you are very much now an international exhibiting artist with exhibitions in London, in New York, as well as here in Sydney and other places. Yet these works are very much about the place close to where you live. How do you reconcile that sense of being international with works that are so closely tied to a very specific environment?
It's easy, Richard. It is just coming from my heart and my hand, and it's still my language that I've taken 45 years to develop. And so I've realized that it doesn't matter where I am in the world, even if it's the ugliest place, I can always find beauty. I can always find something that absolutely fascinates me, a small thing, a big thing, and I have this yearning to paint it. And I will always make it with my mark, which apparently is unique to me. I mean, I've made these paintings about Maine. Here we are sitting in Australia, and you know, they've been very well received. Doesn't seem to matter that I'm responding to my immediate environment. That's my departure point, but ultimately the painting sits on its own. It has its own language that is open to interpretation for the viewer.
You referred then to wherever you are, finding that beauty. And earlier you mentioned how important poetry is in your life, and the work in particular of poet Mary Oliver. I'd love you, if you would, perhaps to read us a little bit of her poetry in just a moment. But before we hear that, I also just wanted to say this will be, in a moment or two, an opportunity for you all to be part of the conversation. We would love to hear, and I know Joanna would love to hear, any questions that you might have for her. So please, just as she's going to read this little bit of poetry, if you haven't thought of a question already that you'd love to ask, now's the time to think of one, and when the poetry has concluded, there'll be an opportunity to ask something of Joanna.
Okay.
Jo, would you...
So I'll introduce my guru, Mary Oliver, but I just wanted to just add a little thing in there that when I went to Maine, I didn't know much about the artists that had gone there. The Hudson River School painters had come up in the mid-18th century, and as rusticators, and that's Thomas Cole and Frederick Church, and then other artists followed, but mainly the collectors followed then, and they were very wealthy people from New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and they built these cottages on the edge of the island, and these cottages are beautiful, grand homes built with cedar shingles, it's a particular type of architecture they use there. And I started to look to these painters, and then I started to look to the painters that were there living around Maine area that came up to summer and respond their whole lives. And people like Alex Katz, Lois Dodd, John Walker, Marsden Hartley, Milton Avery. I mean, all you've got to do is look at a Milton Avery painting to understand how to unpack that island, ocean, granite boulder. You know, so they were very strong keys into a way of me finding a pathway into a way of seeing this place. But I also went to the poets that had lived in that area, and particularly Wendell Berry, who's an activist and has an incredible reverence for the landscape, the environment, and he does a lot of rewilding. And if you can get hold of any of his work, it might sound obscure to you, but if you get hold of his work, it's really heart-opening stuff and positive affirmation for what we need right now with what's going on in the world and our planet. But Mary Oliver, and hands up who knows Mary Oliver's poetry, right? So she's become my religion. When I get stuck in the studio, I go and just open the devotions book, come to any poem, and it settles me, inspires me, quickens my spirit, and I can then move back towards my painting. So I've just got two poems here, but I'll just read one. I won't indulge myself. Very good writing. So, when I am among the trees, Mary Oliver. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say they've saved me, and daily. I also am so distant from hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and often bow. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from the branches, and they call again. "It's simple," they say, "and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine."
Beautiful words by an extraordinary poet, and beautiful to hear them coming from you, because I think we could all feel how much they relate to the works that are around us today. There is, as I said, an opportunity now, just for 10 minutes maybe, for you to ask Joanna a question or two. So would somebody like to do that? Yes, thank you.
Joanna, you mentioned 5-month snow around
Yes.
you. My untrained eye here doesn't see any paintings with snow.
No, because I made it before the winter. I made them in the fall. From Monday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, yeah. So I work quite intensely. Once I get my body of work on the go, I actually can't take any distractions. So I become quite prolific. I don't read anything, I don't watch anything.
So you're very disciplined in your studio.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Hi.
Oh, Randy.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have no desire
have done. Yeah, and I exhibited a couple of snow paintings here in my last show. Randy will remember. She could have sold it 20 times. Do you know what's beautiful about the snow landscape is there's so much colour. And every little kind of silvery leaf that's left over is really powerful against the white, and you get these wonderful positive and negative shades and the long blue shadows. And everything is pared down to the essential. So I was saying to Martin, my husband, I think my next body of work is going to be all snow paintings. So when I'm going out cross-country skiing for hours, I take my camera and I make images, and you would have seen some in that little audio visual of these amazing black pools of water coursing through these white embankments with birches cutting across. So the composition becomes quite pared down, which for me, I believe at this point I need to really think about that, because these works have become so complex that my idea when I go home is that I really want to open up the picture plane to space for the eye to rest.
Well, we really look forward to that interesting change in direction. That sounds marvellous. Peter.
Joanna, thanks for a very illuminating discussion. Do you miss the overall landscape? You painted some extraordinary pieces there, and when you've come back home intermittently, do you feel like you want to attack it again from a different perspective?
This is my plan. I just have to negotiate it with my husband, which we spend a lot of time apart doing it. He's a stem cell biologist, and we're both very passionate about what we do, and we travel all over the world independently. But there comes a time where, you know, you got to water it, and I can't stay away for too long. But my yearning, my deep yearning, is to bring this language that I've developed while I've been away for 8 years in America, and the confidence that I've gained. I really feel that I've found my painting legs for really the first time in my life. I've found my painting legs and I'm on my way. And so I'm thinking, how special would it be to bring that level of confidence and skill that I've acquired and thinking to the Australian landscape, and how different would that be? But I've got plans. I'm heading out to Fowler's Gap tomorrow, out past Broken Hill. I've got a suitcase full of paints. I can't wait to get out there. Actually, that painting there was inspired by my time last September out at Fowler's. I went out with Nicole Kelly and painted it at Ochre House down at the Billabong, and I actually painted that in my Maine studio, which felt a bit dislocated, but I think I pulled it off. I'm very happy with that painting. I think it's one of the most successful works in the show, and I think it sits beautifully amongst these works. Thanks, Pete.
Yes.
I don't know quite how to phrase this, but what was it like when you first went to Maine? Was it like, oh, I'm beginning to belong here? Was there an immediate kind of connection, or was it something that came slowly? And do you react very differently to different landscapes, so that you're really drawn to some and settle in, and others you think, I don't know, I just can't be this one. Does that happen to you? Do you have...
Never.
No?
I'm always drawn to whatever landscape. I've been to Kyoto, I just went to Greece, to the island of Idra with my friend Susan Baird, and I painted for 16 days in the garden of a little cottage called Lemon Tree House, and learned so much. And that's after I'd been down to see the Bonnard retrospective at the Phillips Museum in DC. So I was full of Bonnard and the garden paintings, and I expected to go to Greece and paint water with, you know, islands and wildflowers, but I sat in this garden for literally 16 days and made many monoprints of the bougainvillea, the geraniums, the scaffold of the pergola, the red rooftops. I learned so much. And so, but the other answer to you, the other part of your question about sense of belonging, no. I don't feel like I belong in Maine. I feel like a fish out of water. I feel like I'm on an extended residency, but that's okay because I've always got home.
And probably a final question. Oh, Randy.
I just thought it might be interesting, Joanna, if you told people a little bit about how you actually ended up going to Maine. Because prior to that, and meeting Martin, and you did quite a lot of traveling with Martin, and that to me is when I saw your work start to change. When you were exposed to all those other landscapes and all the colors and the different seasons and the times of the day. It might be an interesting story about why you went to Maine in the first place, because it's a long step, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you want the duck's guts or just this? Okay. So as I said, my husband, my relatively new husband, is a stem cell biologist, very high profile, doing amazing work. And he had collected my paintings for many years. I'm sure people have heard this story before, so sorry if I'm repeating myself. But he had collected me for many years, and he was living in California, heading up a big stem cell research center at the University of Southern California. And he was coming to speak to a conference here, and he looked me up, and he had 12 of my paintings. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to let this guy in. What a pain in the ass this is going to be, right? Oh, is he stalking me? But then I looked at his profile photo and I thought, cute, okay. So anyway, he came to visit, and that was when I'd always come down from Oberon, and I would rent Fred Press's studio in Annandale when he would go to France for the winter. And so I was making a big exhibition in that space, and Martin came to visit, and there was some little sparks, and we had a lovely afternoon, and we went for dinner, and then he went back to the airport hotel. And when he was in the air flying home, he wrote me a long love letter, and just telling me how special it was to meet me, but about how much joy he felt he could bring to my world, because his world was so open. My world was relatively closed, let's face it. I'd been living at Essington Park for 20 years. I'd been widowed. I'd been widowed, and I'd never gone into a serious relationship since then, and so it was something for me to seriously think about. All the boxes were ticked. Plus, I didn't own any of my own work, and I thought, hello. And they were bloody good paintings, because he's got a really good eye. So we started a 2-year correspondence, and then we started dating, flying across the Pacific. The first date Martin and I had was he flew from California all the way to Sydney, and then hired a car and drove to Hill End, where I had a residency at the Hayfliger Cottage. And he's like, bathroom? And I'm like, yeah, it's the dunny out the back, right? So this is the kind of, clash of cultures, I suppose, or him being the scientist and me being the painter, and you wouldn't think it would work, but it really does. We're both so passionate about what we do in our projects, and we let ourselves steep deeply into that and encourage that. So Martin got an opportunity to go and work in a laboratory that does mouse genetics. They grow mice for laboratories all over the world, and this laboratory is on the island where we live, oddly enough, and scientists from all over the world come and work there and use the mouse as part of their scientific process. And Martin is working in macular degeneration, and he hopes to bring sight to millions of people through his what he's doing in the petri dish, which is growing light sensing cells and put them on a scaffold on the back of the eye, and it's going into human trial in 2 years. So this is the kind of animal I'm dealing with, and I find him absolutely fascinating, and he finds me absolutely fascinating. Go figure. So yes, I married him, and we moved to Mount Desert Island, and the world is still our oyster. That's how I feel. Yeah.
It is wonderful to hear the way in which potentially Martin's work will bring light to so many people, and the capacity to see with joy and newfound enthusiasm. And you bring to us in this exhibition so much light, so much joy, so much enthusiasm. And we thank you this afternoon for sharing so much with such grace and such generosity. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank Joanna Logue.
I'd just like to thank Randy and Robert, who have supported me in such an unwavering way through my painting career. I feel so nurtured and supported in my creative development by them. And I also want to thank the girls in the gallery, Eleni, Joanne, Tia, and Amanda, for just getting back to me in such a timely fashion every time I email them, and just making me feel so comfortable when I come into the gallery. It's so affirming. And to Joanne for making such a beautiful catalogue for me. I know it wasn't easy. We had some issues with the colour reproduction, but she worked so hard and she made it happen, and I'm really proud of my catalogue. Thank you, and thank you, Richard.